Today I'm sitting down with Mike Medina, who is the Associate Director of Intramurals and is a part-time faculty member. We're going to talk about all things club sports for you guys today. Really exciting news. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk.
Absolutely. So to get started off, in your role now, you oversee intramurals as a whole. I'm sure when the announcement happened, you saw the reactions of some diehard intramural sports members. Can you talk about maybe the reactions that you saw first?
Yeah, there's so much excitement right now on campus with this new initiative, and I think it really speaks to the enthusiasm that so many of our students have for sports and the ability to play at a competitive level. And one area of intramurals that we've seen are those really good high school athletes who come in and intramurals just isn't competitive enough for them. And I know the students have been pushing so hard for this club sports initiative, and I'm so happy that this now allows them the opportunity to represent the university and to compete against other institutions at the club level.
How has it been being one of the people behind the scenes really paving the way for the future of club sports at Quinnipiac?
Yeah, this is a discussion that's really gone on for a long time, and I know our students have wanted to see this level of a competition, and I think behind the scenes and everything that we've done over the last 5 weeks to get this ready has been at warp speed, and it's been awesome to see the enthusiasm and the buy-in and so many of the people who helped out in terms of getting onto the committee. We had some great student members and feedback that allowed for the students really to be heard in this process as to what clubs we should be pushing forward in this first rollout. And we had 21 teams that applied, which shows just how excited the students were to get involved in this process. And I think it's going to be such a cool opportunity in fall of 2019 to see these teams compete for the first time.
Absolutely. I know so many students are looking forward to it. I know part of that kind of whole rollout thing, you guys held information sessions. I was just wondering what the attendance was like, what was kind of the vibe in that room during all those sessions?
Yeah, the first time that I went out and I spoke at the SGA meeting right after spring break was enormous, the number of students that came out and were asking questions about how everything was going to look. And it actually gave me some really good insight into what we needed to start putting into our handbook, what are the common questions that came out. And then once we were able to have the smaller information sessions here in the Student Center, we saw the leaders of each group and who was really passionate about the sport that they were applying for. And we would see 5, 7, 12 at the different sessions that we had. And I think it was basically a trickle down from what we saw at that SGA meeting where Ryan and I kind of put out, hey, you're going to get an opportunity to ask any question that you want about the club sports application process and what club sports at Quinnipiac is going to look like in that fall 2019 semester. So the questions, the enthusiasm, the ideas that students have to make their team successful has been really, really cool. And I love to see the passion that students have brought to this entire process.
I would love for you to just talk a little bit about what the application process was like for these 21 teams to go through.
Mm-hmm. So we really needed to get the nuts and bolts of what's the enthusiasm, who's really got a large contingent of people who are interested in this sport. So we asked for a roster. We asked to understand what types of facilities they would need to use, both on campus and off campus. We wanted to know budget because one of the big things that students who participate in club sports want to know is how much dues am I going to have to pay in order to participate in this sport that I love so much. So we asked them to go through a budget process, and the really final aspect that we needed to know is who's the national governing body and who you're going to be playing against in all of these. Are you going to be able to play against other schools in the local area? And we saw, particularly in New England, there's so many club sports programs at all different levels of universities and colleges in the area that there's a really deep pool regionally for these teams that we've accepted and who have also applied for them to compete against.
And that announcement of teams is coming today. The application process ended March 31st. Can you give us a sneak peek of what's to come in the announcement later today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think by the time this gets online, we'll have already made our announcement on our rollout. So, I'm excited to announce the first 10 teams that we've been able to accept. And on the men's side, we've accepted men's ice hockey, men's lacrosse, and men's rugby. On the women's side, we have our dance team that's going to be brand new to the university, as well as figure skating and equestrian. And then we will also be recognizing the women's lacrosse, women's soccer, and women's volleyball club teams. And our final team is a co-ed team, and it's a unique aspect of the club tennis scene that it's not just a men's team and a women's team. They actually compete as co-ed. There's a men's single, there's a women's single, men's double, women's double, and then a mixed double component. So co-ed tennis is going to be our 10th team.
I know there was a selection committee who ended up deciding what teams would be rolled out next year. Can you talk about maybe like how and why these sports in specific were chosen in the end?
Yeah, a great question. We definitely had a blend of both recreation and student affairs professionals who helped us kind of look at what the organizations would look like. And then we had 3 students on the total committee of 7 that we had who really gave us that student perspective. We had 1 graduate student, we had 2 undergraduate students who really looked at, what were the sports that they're hearing students to clamor for. And I think we got a really good representation from Caitlin Wardlow, Ryan Hicks, Haley Kozar of what the students are passionate about and what are some of the initial wave of sports that we should offer. So kudos to them. I mean, they put a lot of time and effort into analyzing applications before we met over the course of the last week, and very active in discussions with what we had in our room, where we were very open about how everybody felt about the applications that came in. And I will say the teams that applied did a really good job of making this a difficult decision, because I challenged them at the SGA meeting to make it a difficult decision for us. And there, when you're only taking 10 teams out of 21 that apply, there's obviously going to be some students who feel like, oh, well, why wasn't I picked? And I think, the professionalism that we all handled ourselves in the room of giving every team an equal and fair chance of being a club sport, I have to take my hat off to everybody on the committee who helped me along with this process.
That's really great, really important. I'm sure a lot of people, when they watch this interview, when they hear the announcement, they're going to see Equestrian Team. They're going to be like, whoa. I remember that there was talks of an equestrian team, an equestrian center in years past. Can you talk about maybe how this whole thing will work with facilities, like allowing students riding horses, stuff like that?
Yeah, they're not going to be coming on campus,
Yes.
So I don't think we're going to see horses coming
Yes,
down
absolutely.
Dorm Road. And I know in talking with a couple of professional members on staff that they are hoping that the horses aren't going to make their way into the residence halls. And I don't think anybody has anything to worry about with that. What we're going to see is a working relationship with one of the local stables. Hamden, North Haven, Southington all have facilities that these athletes will be able to utilize. And they have done a lot of the legwork right now to reach out to those stables to kind of start the process of the recognition from our end of things, and then we'll be in contact with them in the next couple of weeks to ensure that they can get the time that they need to go over there and do their practices, and what's going to look like from the competition standpoint. We'll get on a conference call with the national governing body to make sure. But I think one of the things that we've seen is that there has always been this push for an equestrian team. I actually had a voicemail earlier this week from a student from another university who said if we brought Club Equestrian to the university, she was going to transfer here.
Wow.
And I think that goes to speak to the ability that club sports has to recruit and retain students to the university. And that is something that is really important as we're trying to look at the best ways to bring students to this campus. And club sports is certainly something that can do that.
Another club sport that hasn't necessarily really existed on Quinnipiac's campus is figure skating. Can you also talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, we have a little bit of statistics based on our open figure skating night that we've been running through our recreation programs. So we have seen some really talented skaters get up there, and fortunately for them, they've been able to do some jumps and some of their routines on the ice already. So we know that the competitions are out there. The Northeast is kind of a great focal point for figure skating, along with the upper Midwest. So there is a great opportunity for this sport to kind of take off. We know that there are students out there who exist who love figure skating. We also know that the U.S. National Training Center for Skating is here in Connecticut, up in Simsbury. So there's a pull that if somebody is that far along that, it just makes sense for us. You're not going to be maybe able to do it at the professional level or in the Olympic level, but at the club level, there's going to be a lot of teams for them to compete against.
Something you mentioned earlier was something that you heard people were excited about was the fact that their club sports were actually going to be funded. They were going to be able to use Quinnipiac facilities. That's something I found when I've spoken to club athletes as well. Can you talk about the logistics of funding and the logistics of using different facilities for these different club sports teams?
Yeah, so funding, it's going to be equitable for every team across the board. We're going to make sure that every team gets the same seed money to start up, and then it'll be supplemented with student dues. Because we don't have budget numbers yet for the 1920 year, I can't give that exact dollar amount, but I know that any group that is receiving money is going to be getting more money than they would have gotten through an SGA process, or obviously if they have existed outside of the university jurisdiction, that they're going to be getting money from the university that they never had access to, which should help bring dues costs down, I think, for the students who are currently on a club sport team operating outside of the university jurisdiction. With regard to facilities, we certainly looked at what was available from a recreation standpoint, and obviously we have 2 grass intramural fields that will be heavily utilized for club sport team practices. I think from a competition standpoint, they're still going to need to utilize something off campus, just because the size and the lining of those fields might not fit with their national governing body parameters. There's very specific specifications, for example, on the rugby side of things or the lacrosse side of things, of field size and what you need to have for a competition. So we're going to work with local areas to try and find a couple of sites that would allow these teams to have potentially one competition site for all of our club sports teams, but not having to rent fields off campus for practice as another cost saver that we're going to certainly have available for them. Our tennis courts are open to our students right now from a recreational standpoint. They have lights. That's going to be a huge advantage, I think, for club tennis to be able to hold practices at times that maybe fit into student schedules a little bit better than areas that don't have lights. And then our recreation center indoors, we want to try and program that more for our club sport athletes to be able to utilize, for instance, women's volleyball will have a time when they can have a practice and potentially hold competitions in there as well.
Many club teams, they travel from game to game to different universities. They also often enter tournaments, and those tournaments usually have an entry fee. Will those different things be included in the budget for these teams?
So they're going to get one pool of money, and how they decide to spend that money is going to be up to them. They're going to supplement some of those extra expenses. So if a team wants to enter 3 tournaments over the course of their regular season, by all means, they'll be able to do that. But what they'll have to do is just show that they have the financial commitment of their team as well to cover all of the costs that they have. Every team is going to have to be revenue neutral. They're not going to be able to overspend or quote unquote have a credit card where they then take money from a next year or any other account to borrow and pay off something that they don't have. So one of the big things that we'll be doing over the course of the next couple of weeks is training officers, a president, vice president, and treasurer of each organization, to let them know what the expectations are from a financial standpoint. And they're going to work with us as the full-time administrative staff that oversees club sports to make sure that they're hitting everything that they need to do financially.
I did see on the club sports manual that there will be a president, vice president, treasurer position. There will also be a club sports kind of governing council. Can you speak about these kind of new leadership opportunities that will be offered to students and what these positions may entail? Yeah,
I think I'm really excited for that, because it's going to give a student an opportunity to put something on a resume as they apply for a full-time job and be like, look, I've been in a room in a conference table or board table type of situation and had to make tough decisions. Eventually what we'd like to see happen is the council will help us in the selection of elevating or recognizing new club sport teams. They may also be involved in issues where they don't like how the university or our department maybe has a rule or regulation, and we need some of that feedback to better help the students run their club most effectively. And I think once you get those senior leadership positions, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a senior in class, but those presidents, vice presidents, treasurers, they're going to be responsible for communicating with the national governing body. They're going to be responsible for communicating with our office and helping us to make sure that we fulfill everything that they need to do with that league or that overall national body.
And for the Quinnipiac students who applied to have a certain club sport be debuted at Quinnipiac University, they weren't chosen this year. What is the future for them? Will there be another application process?
Yeah, absolutely. We're planning on having an application process every spring semester. So we don't want to think that this is the be-all, end-all. I think the university definitely recognizes that this is an initial investment and that there's going to be potentially more club sport teams that come around in future years. 10 was kind of a great number for this first wave. It's a very manageable situation. It still puts us at a smaller number than some of our peer institutes, but I think it definitely will help us now have that recruitment and retention tool with it. So more information will certainly come out as we roll out the club sports program in 1920 about the expectations of a team renewing and obviously the expansion and if we're going to be adding more teams, but we'll probably stick with a similar application process in future years.
And then another thing that I heard from different of the unaffiliated right now club sport athletes, something they were really excited about with this announcement was the fact that they will represent Quinnipiac, the fact that they will have Quinnipiac written on their jerseys. Mm-hmm. But another side of that was a lot of them still want their name incorporated into this new kind of team. How will jerseys work, team uniforms, and the whole naming process of these different teams?
Yeah, so we're working on that right now, and I don't have a 100% full answer on that because we're still working through that process. But yes, they will have the Quinnipiac name front and center on that jersey, which I think has been so important to a lot of these student groups, is to be able to represent the university. I think there'll be a way for students to kind of preserve the past while also combining it with the present and future that we expect out of the Quinnipiac club sport model. And the key is that each one of these teams will be represented as Quinnipiac Club Rugby, Quinnipiac Club Equestrian, and they'll be utilizing that name in their leagues and when they table on campus or when they represent themselves, they'll get to utilize that name. So I think a lot of the teams who maybe have uniforms right now may need to do a refresh or an update on that for the fall 2019 season, because I think they're going to want to put that Quinnipiac front and center.
Absolutely, definitely will. That's all the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, thanks very much for having us. And we're really excited about this initiative, and I hope the students, as they see this roll out through the rest of the semester, continue that enthusiasm into the 1920 school year.
Well, thank you so much for being
here.
No
problem. Thanks, Callie.
To follow along with all of our club sport coverage, make sure to head to Q30TV.com and follow at Q30 News on Twitter to stay up to date on the latest on club sports.